standing by.
Thank you, producers. At this point, we will weigh in with our esteemed panel of guests on the night's proceedings. Tonight we have Jefferson Parish, a former chief of staff to Hurricane Hazel of Mississauga. He is now apart chief for fiscally conservative.
Fiscally conservative water-based politicians, am I right, Beverly? Thank you for joining us. Next, we have Elgort Moss, a longtime swamp strategist and author of the book Wag the Bog, An Insider's Life in Cryptid Politics. Welcome to you, Elgort.
Happy to be here.
Lastly, we have Murky Mandrake, professor of political ornithology at Duxford College.
Hello. Hi. Happy to be here.
Thank you for being with us.
Hello. Hi. Happy to be here.
Thank you for taking the time this evening. This has obviously been a very strange election year. Mr. Parish, what are some challenges a candidate would face this year, and whom has navigated these challenges the best?
Well, there's a few challenges I'd like to offer to your viewers. Thanks for having me. First of all, jobs, debt, deficit, not enough people talking about this, and I think the only candidate that has had a firm vision on that is S.A.M. A couple other things. S.A.M. is running on a platform to drain the swamp, and as you know, the swamp hasn't really been drained since the Big Dig, so I think that's something people are looking forward to and responding to well. And a couple other toss-ups we have here tonight. One, of course, is the weather, and the other one, of course, these elections often pander to the goose and the fungal demographic, but with the onset of the coronavirus, you might see that there's going to be a very large viral demographic here in this election. It'll be interesting to see if any of these candidates capture that vote and if they get them to the polls in this weather. Thanks.
So much. Mr. Mandrake, much of the early race was concerned with kitchen table issues, like the high cost of phytoplankton and the increasing presence of brackish water is hitting much too close to home. Which candidate appeals to the needs of these everyday families?
Well, when you look at candidates like Honk Gooserman, you have obviously a very strong base in the waterfowl community, but that campaign made a lot of inroads with small mammals and amphibians, but struggled a lot with connecting with insect voters. I think a lot of the voters out there, especially the kitchen table voters, are really concerned about corporate interests feathering their nests, and a lot of candidates ducking important questions.
What about you other candidates? Do you have answers for that?
Well, interestingly enough, we see a lot of widgeon issues emerging here. So, for example, if you look at T.A.B's platform, we have policies like affordable nesting, which appeals to a lot of waterfowl voters, but at the same time, targeting duck poop cleanup and goose poop cleanup really does isolate those voters. So that kind of tension is something that we would not normally expect to see in a campaign unless they're doing microorganism targeting, which I believe the T.A.B campaign was doing quite extensively. And then we see the use of local resources. That's going to appeal, the S.A.M campaign, that's going to appeal to a lot of detritivores and mushroom communities, but it might kind of detract from the overall ambiance of the coastal communities. So I think you see a lot of interesting policies being run, and it's going to be quite fascinating to see at the end of election night how those policies and platforms resonate with swamp voters.
And Mr. Moss, thank you very much. Mr. Moss, one of the biggest battleground states has been between liquid and gas. Who is prepared to handle this tricky diplomatic issue?
Look, these are times of great instability, but a politics of division is the wrong approach. Whether your liquids are evaporating or your gases are beginning to condense, you want a candidate who's going to help you get some stability in your life. If you're going to be voting a mysterious interdimensional entity or highly educated waterfowl into mayoral office, you want someone who's going to be looking out for your interests and campaigning on a solid platform so you can focus on the things that are important, like your family, your well-being, and maintaining a consistent state of matter. But I think in politics bringing unity, a swamp is an extraordinarily biodiverse place. And I think you've seen a pretty broad interspecies coalition lining up so far behind T.A.B's campaign in particular.
Thank you, Mr. Moss. Mr. Parish, S.A.M has recently come under fire for not supporting the LGBTQ community. Do you believe he is committed to biodiversity in the swamp?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I just want to back to the last question there. I think there's going to be an interesting switch here, just like in the surrounding prairie area where you've got the NDP conservative flip-flop voters, and they don't stop in that middle state. I think too we might see some sublimation tonight, that rare solid gas transition. And to your point about the S.A.M making a statement last week to clarify his position on support of the LGBTQ community, where he confirmed himself as a bachelor, which I think was an important message to voters. And if we look at the exit polls that the data I've got shows that even though T.A.B seems like the LGBTQ candidate, we're not seeing him get the majority in those exit polls. Both Honk Gooserman and S.A.M have a good chunk of that. And, when it comes to these special interest groups, we always say in politics that a rising swamp raises all algae. And I think that's what we're going to see for every community if S.A.M wins tonight.
Thank you. Mr. Mandrake, Dr. Honk Gooserman has been accused by several online pundits as being a, quote, saltwater socialist. Is there any merit to these accusations?
Look, there's been a lot of foul muckraking in this campaign. I mean, for example, some people went so far as to accuse Honk Gooserman as working for the bourgeoisie and as a CIA operative. These allegations are completely false, and this is a kind of mudslinging and muckraking you expect to see in a campaign fought by candidates who perhaps have maybe slightly too large of a budget. Really, they should be focusing on talking to voters and connecting with people around important progressive issues that resonate with people here in the swamp.
Thank you so much. Mr. Moss, no matter who wins, this will be their first time in office. What challenges will they face representing this particular swamp? What if, God forbid, one day the levee is dry?
Well, that's a very difficult situation that I don't think any particular candidate wants to face. But God forbid that comes to pass. They'll face a number of challenges. Music won't play, children will scream, lovers will cry, poets will be dreaming. You tend to see an increase in ruptures and breakages in church bells. But with the right kind of leadership, even in a situation where the levee is dry, them good old boys are going to be drinking whiskey and rye and singing, "This will be the day that I die."
Agreed.
Mm-hmm.
And now we would like to offer the forum to you, our pundits. Do you have any questions for each other about your individual expertise?
I was going to ask Moss here a couple of questions. One of the things that's come up a lot in this campaign are questions around swamps, whether they should be drained or maintained. How do you think the candidates sort of stacked up with respect to not just maintaining the swamp, but encouraging the swamp to flourish?
Well, you've got a couple candidates with very different approaches, and one candidate whose primary method of communication involves sort of a high-pitched noise coming out of their beak and throat area, occasionally sort of mimicking a wattle. They're three very diverse approaches.
Are necessary for discussion of ideas, but.
The language issues. I think it would be incorrect to ignore, some of the wise words of Honk, for example, really sometimes are missed because we don't have the same kind of translation services here. We have to be encouraging a multilingual swamp community, and when people can say things like and go misunderstood, that's a problem, right? So we have these beautiful policy opportunities from Gooserman that just aren't being translated to the voters. Do you feel that there's been a disconnect between the sort of the more intellectual policies of the waterfowl in this campaign and the sort of more down to earth or perhaps below the earth kind of policies of candidates like S.A.M?
Jefferson, I'll let you field that since it addressed S.A.M directly, and you're kind of an expert on S.A.M's policies.
Well, I think broadly, I think ever since there's been a Willow Island, ever since there's been Wascana Lake, I think it's been a fairly multilingual, and there's been some exceptions, of course, but there is a vernacular and a parlance that perhaps we're limiting some opportunities for some candidates and for some demographics to share some ideas. But I, regardless, don't think that that's going to have a real impact on the outcome tonight, but I'm looking forward to hearing what others might think.
Yeah, I mean, I believe there's, no matter how you communicate, ultimately messaging to the variety of the species that exist in the swamp has to do with like basic swamp issues, whether it be lichen and other fungal maintenance, whether it be overall aeration of the lake, whether it be the development and redevelopment or investment in existing and new dank spaces, as well as nesting areas, dens, warrens. The important thing is meeting voters where they are, whether that's at the top of a tree, deep underneath its ball, or somewhere tangled in a large blob of weeds, algae, and other underwater substances.
Now, on issue polls, did you folks notice anything around issue polls relating to affordable nesting? Because I think this was an important policy in the T.A.B campaign that helped migrate a lot of fowl and bird voters away from, say, their normal home, voting for Honk Gooserman. So, we were considering those kinds of single issue voters, especially ones around affordable nesting, as being a really important issue.
I would say ultimately affordable nesting might sound like a single voter, a single coalition issue, might be addressed to the waterfowl and small songbird population. But ultimately, affordable nesting sort of affects all the residents of the swamp. When those creatures are able to get the sort of homes and residence they need to raise their young, bring them back food to regurgitate into their mouth, etc. It really opens up a lot of possibilities for everything from rabbits to small voles and other insects to not be competing necessarily with space. So, T.A.B, it was a smart play from T.A.B to be doing that.
Gentlemen, maybe for our last word, we'll ask you each who you believe will represent the swamp the best. Mr. Parish, why don't you start?
Sorry, I missed that. Can you repeat that, please?
We were just wondering, in your opinion, as your last word, who do you represent? Who do you think will represent the swamp the best?
Well, the number one issue with everybody in the swamp, from the bottom right up to the top of the tallest bush, is the economy. It's the economy. It's the economy, stupid. And I'm telling you, S.A.M has run on a platform of sell, sell, sell. The other two candidates don't believe in slither down bioeconomics. So I don't see how any candidate will be able to protect the future of this swamp like S.A.M. So that's why S.A.M is the candidate I'll be supporting. Thank you.
Mr. Mandrake, same question.
Well, one of the things I hope is that voters don't regret their vote at the end of election night. When we take a gander at all the different platforms that are out there, we see some really good fledgling policies. But one of the concerns that a lot of voters have had is that many of the candidates seem to be flying by the seat of their pants. I think the waterfowl and bird communities are going to come out big time for Gooserman. And the real question is a question of get out the vote, whether the other communities, amphibians and single-cell organisms, show up at the polls. They might just be disheartened. So I think there's a strong wave, a flock of people gathering towards the Gooserman banner, and we might see a successful goose-based campaign and a goose mayor for in Wascana Lake for the first time.
And Mr. Moss, I leave the final word with you. Who has your support?
I think voters in this election are looking for candidates strong roots in the community, both literal and metaphorical. And T.A.B has a lengthy root bulb to spare in both. So I think it's probably going to be around.
Thank you so much, gentlemen, for taking time to speak with us today. Your insight has been extremely eye-opening.
Well, that was certainly a very spirited debate, and I think it gave us all a lot to think about.
It absolutely was.
Have a great night.
Go
We'll
Riders.
be right back after this commercial break.